Circle trackers are damn gorgeous and can be a really cool way to change up your regular tracker pages. In today's video, I'm going to be taking you through how to draw the two we have here, so the more traditional full circle tracker and one that's a little bit different. Hello again team, it's Jess or JashiiCorrin and welcome back for another video. Ask and you shall receive. Today we're talking about circular trackers. And in particular, from your request, we'll be looking at how to draw the tracker related to this stencil from scratch. Now, this will be a little bit easier with some specific supplies, namely a circle stencil, circle maker, or compass. I personally am going to be making use of my Helix circle maker and the Stettler circle stencil. But if you don't have these, you can just use different sized circular bottom objects you can find in your house. For instance, sticky tape rolls, glasses, cups, bowls, etc. But it will be a little bit easier to get consistency in the spacing between concentric circles if you have a stencil of some description. Getting started with drawing out our trackers, a big tip I have is to start with pencil. This ensures that you're going to get things in the right place with the right spacing and dimensions before you've committed to the pen. There is nothing worse than drawing something awesome out and realizing you've put it in the wrong place or that certain lines aren't where they're supposed to be. As you can see here, for both trackers I'm starting with a bunch of concentric circles that I'm drawing with my Helix circle maker. Depending on the number of habits you want to track for the regular tracker, you can just change up the spacing between those circles to be bigger or smaller, or just change the size of the tracker overall itself. Focusing on that regular circle tracker first, once the concentric circles are drawn in, we then want to divide the tracker into enough segments for each day of the month and a space to write down the thing that we're tracking. I find it easiest to divide this into 32 sections that are the same size, which will give me enough spaces for 31 days and a key. If I'm in a month that has less days, I can combine segments together for the key to achieve the correct number. So for instance, in a month with only 30 days, I'll make the key take up 2 segments. The nice part about dividing this into 32 sections is that you can just start by drawing lines that are vertical, horizontal, and on a 45-degree angle quite easily, just using the grid in your journal. This gets our tracker into 8 sections, so now we just need to divide each of those into 4. You can do this by eye, but I'm a bit particular when it comes to making sure that each segment is similarly sized. To achieve this, I use a protractor to give myself some guiding points to rule between. As a full circle is 360 degrees, and I want 32 segments, this means each of them is going to take up 11.25 degrees. Obviously, getting my segments to all be that precise is a little bit tricky, but even having them range from 11 to 12 degrees is still going to give us a consistent looking tracker. Once all the penciling is done, it's time to commit to the pen. I typically like to start with the inner and outermost borders of my tracker, just so that I know where my intersecting lines should start and stop. Depending on how you're going to use the circular tracker, there are going to be a few different ways to draw this out. For habits, I like to have each of the concentric circles drawn in with pen, like I've got here. But for things like my steps tracker, I prefer to leave those circles as pencil lines, so I can fill from the middle out to the number of steps that I achieved for that day. I've seen people do similar things with mood trackers and time log style trackers, where the amount a segment is filled in for each day is used to represent the extent of something or a certain amount of time. For instance, how many hours of sleep you had, or on a scale of 1 to 10, how was your mood? There are heaps of ways that you can use this circular style tracker. If you wanted to see some examples, I do have a link to my related Pinterest board in the description box below, which might be a little bit helpful and give you some ideas. It's also good to note here that if you are using this as a habit tracker, it can get pretty tight with the intersecting lines towards the center. This makes those segments really small and a bit harder to differentiate and fill in. Most people prefer to keep the very middle of circle trackers either open or filled with some kind of decoration, or as a space for kind of a title or heading. Moving on to our second style of tracker. For the one that I showed you last week, To achieve the spacing on that tracker, you would have to cut the concentric circles into segments that have a range of roughly 7 degrees. But for the one I'm drawing here, I'm sticking with dividing it into 32 segments. From this point, there are a fair few different combinations of how you can accommodate for your daily, bi-weekly, weekly, and monthly tasks. Remember that for any daily task, you'll need 7 segments, while the bi-weekly and weekly ones will need 5. For the monthly ones, you can take up as many or as few of the segments as you want. If you have more things to track, you'll likely want to divide the original concentric circles into smaller segments. And again, if you're looking for consistency, I do recommend using a protractor. You can get 36 segments using 10 degrees, or 40 segments using 9 degrees, or, if you needed them, even 72 segments if you're using 5 degrees. But that would make for a pretty tight tracker. I encourage you to consider how many tasks of each type you want to track first, so how many daily, weekly, etc. Add up how many segments that would need minimum, and then figure out what kind of division you need to accommodate those. Essentially, 360 degrees divided by the number of segments gives you the number of degrees per segment. With the 32 segments that I have here, I'm going with 2 daily, 1 bi-weekly, 2 weekly, and 1 monthly task. So in terms of segments, that's 7 plus 7, plus 5 plus 5 plus 5, and then I'll use the remaining 3 spaces for that monthly task. This is just an example, and of course, make sure to plan out what would work best for you. One of the things that makes the tracker from last week so interesting to look at is the differences in how far out each of those segments reach, with none of the tracking items that are next to each other being placed at the same distance from the middle. How you place this is completely up to you, but I prefer to organize it so I kind of have a zigzagging pattern. So one task is further out, and then the next one is closer, and then the next one's further out, etc. Also, if this tracker style was looking a little bit confusing and you hadn't already watched last week's video, there's a link to that one in the cards above which explains how this type of tracker works. I do recommend you go check it out if you hadn't already. Once you've decided on how far out you want the section for each task to go, then it's down to penning things in. This can be a bit tricky, and I do very much recommend you take your time. Remember that the spaces for tracking your task completion should be along the outermost border of each section, but the inner parts are where you're going to be writing your tasks down, so make sure not to extend any dividing lines into those parts accidentally. You'll have seen that to help myself with this, I went in with my pencil and darkened up where I wanted each section to go, and also erased some of the lines that I knew I didn't want to pen in. This can be helpful to make sure you don't accidentally put lines where they shouldn't be. While in the last tracker, I started by putting in all the concentric circles with the pen first. Here I only do the central one to make sure I don't extend the intersecting lines too far, and then draw the intersecting lines between each task. This is so that when I pen along those concentric circles, I again know where to stop and don't go too far. I then went in again with my helix to put in the parts of the circle that were needed to separate each of the spaces to fill in my task completion. For the daily habits, you'll see I have 5 rows, and the bi-weekly I have 2, while the weekly and the monthly tasks just have the 1 row. Once all those were drawn in, I then ruled in the remaining intersecting lines to separate each space for tracking. As we spoke about last week, this style of tracker can be used for a wide range of things. For example, as a chore tracker, action steps for your goals, project planning, or as suggested by Erin Floto, as a pet care tracker. Those are just some ideas, and by dividing it differently to suit you, there are even more possibilities. Once you've drawn your trackers out, you then get to think about how you'll denote the things you're tracking. Are you going to write them out as words, or are you going to use icons? If you want any decoration, in particular if you're trying to make this tie in with a monthly theme, any headers you're going to use, how you're going to fill your trackers, etc. What I've drawn out here for you are just 2 possibilities for these trackers. Remember, there are plenty of ways that you can make it your own in terms of sizing, colour, design, or decoration. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, please do make sure to give it a big thumbs up. If you wanted to see more from me, feel free to go check out one of my other videos, and if you hadn't already and felt so inclined, feel free to subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching, team, and until next time, bye!